You might remember a while back I did a couple of videos on the executive cars sold in Britain during the 1970s and 80s, and also another one about the cars I missed from the 1970s videos. Thanks for the corrections. Someone recently asked if I was going to do any more of these videos, and that jogged me to get around to covering the 1990s. The 1980s saw the rise of German car makers, with other European car makers really suffering. The 1990s promised the rise of cars from the land of the rising sun, Japan. They were introducing a swathe of luxury cars to the US market, the new Lexus, Infiniti and Acura brands, and it made sense that they would bring those same cars to Europe. So, would they stop Germany's dominance? Well, this is the 1990s executive car story. In 1990, the number of British executive cars was much less than its heyday in the early 1970s, but it was still clinging on, thanks in part to a collaboration with Honda. The new Honda Acura Legend was a joint development with Rover, sold as the Rover 800. Vauxhall, a sort of British company at this point, was selling the German-designed and manufactured Carlton and Senator. Ford were just recovering from their blunder with the Granada hatchback with a saloon that had only just been released. There were high hopes Ford could reclaim ground in the executive market, as they'd done by fixing the Sierra. Jaguar was still selling the XJ, and they'd recently been bought by Ford. The American car producer were focused on turning Jaguar around, and there were promises of an executive car to come later in the decade. France were reeling from the German onslaught as well. Citroën thought the new XM would be popular, but after a year of sales, it wasn't a big hit with customers. They were still selling the CX brake until the XM estate appeared in 1991. Peugeot had been focused on getting their mass market cars back on track in the 1980s with cars like the 205, and had largely been successful. This meant their large car, the 505, suffered. It had been on sale since 1979 and looked ancient by 1990. They had introduced the larger Peugeot 605 in 1989, and it arrived in Britain a year later. Renault were having problems generating a profit. The 1983 Renault 25 came from a period when the French car maker were making cars that didn't exactly set the world on fire. New models from Renault and Peugeot were on the way, and with both companies getting their affairs in order, their cars should surely be a vast improvement. Whilst Britain and France were stumbling, Germany was riding high. There was a new Audi 100 being sold alongside the premium but older Audi 200. The 200 would end production a year later because if you wanted a top-of-the-line car, there was the Audi V8. All this was to compete with BMW's model range. The V8 was hoping to take on the 7 Series. But as far as BMW was concerned, Audi were very much in the rearview mirror in 1990, even if they were gaining ground. BMW still offered the 3, the 5 and the 7 Series as they had since the 1970s, with sales booming. Mercedes were taking their high-end cars and offering less expensive models like the W124 and the smaller W201 that would become the E and the C class. Like Audi and BMW, they were going from strength to strength. Italy's executive car lineup was dominated by cars from Fiat now that they owned Alfa Romeo and Lancia. Given this, it was no accident that the Fiat Croma, Lancia Thema and the Alfa Romeo 164 shared the same underpinnings as did the Saab 9000, as it had been a joint collaboration. That car was still on sale along with the Saab 900 that had launched way back in 1978. Saab was low on cash, as could be seen from its need to collaborate to make a new car, and they'd cast around for a new owner. They found it in General Motors in 1989. By 1990, there was an influx of cash and designers were already planning a new model range. This was a new start, and Saab would be GM's European luxury brand. Volvo was still doing their boxy thing, selling the 700 series and, as was their custom, keeping the older 200 model around for budget-conscious motorists. So you'd think the 200 series would end production in 1990 as Volvo launched the 700's replacement, the 900 series. But no, the 200 series remained on sale, which on the face of it seemed confusing. The reality was that newer models are often larger than the older models. Volvo now saw the 200 series as a mid-size car and the 700, now 900 series as their large car. With a 900 series name, you might think that the new car was larger, but upon closer inspection, this was really just a facelift of the older model. That was because all of Volvo's resources had been poured into the 200 series replacement that would launch in 1991. The Japanese were coming, actually they were already here. The Rover 800's sister, the Honda Legend, had been on sale since 1986 and it got its first update in 1990. The Rover 800 was already out of date. Nissan's luxury brand Infiniti had launched in North America, but those models hadn't made it to Europe. What we got instead was the Maxima, a car on its third generation elsewhere, but getting its European debut in 1990. Whilst it focused on technical innovations like speed-sensitive steering, it lacked other luxuries like leather seats, but this was a sign that Nissan were moving up market. Mazda were also planning a luxury brand, something that would end in disaster. The echoes of this luxury dream would appear later in the decade, but for now in Europe they continued to sell the 929. Toyota was still selling the Camry, but this wasn't a patch on a BMW. The new Lexus LS was, and it launched in 1990. This was a car that scared all luxury car makers. Designed on an estimated $1 billion budget, this was a car that instantly turned Toyota into the maker of one of the finest cars in the world. That was the state of play in 1990. 1991 was short on new cars, but the one that launched was something special, the new Volvo 850. This was a big bet. Volvo had spent most of their money in the 1980s developing it, so it needed to succeed. Thankfully, the bet paid off. The 850 sold well and was a worthy successor to the 200 series. The Mazda 929 got an update, well, more than an update. This was a model from the Japanese luxury Infiniti brand and was intended to be part of a broader push up market across the globe. For now, it remained just a new version of the 929. 1992 was the end of the line for two French cars, the Peugeot 505 and the unloved Renault 25. The 505 wouldn't get a replacement, customers were directed to the 605, but Renault would replace the 25 with the new Safran. Like the Citroën XM, it was a hatchback, and like the XM, it wasn't a hit with customers, selling even less than the Renault 25 despite being better constructed. The Renault badge seen on the Clio and the Twingo didn't have the same cachet as that of a Mercedes. What did have the cachet of a Mercedes was a Mercedes. The baby saloon was rebranded as the C-Class, simplifying the previous confusing model numbering system. After being on sale since 1474, the favourite executive car of Henry VIII, in 1993 the Volvo 200 series finally ended production. Mazda's luxury BMW 3 Series killer, the Z-DOS 6, launched using the same platform as the 626 and the MX-6. It was meant to be the Amati 300, Mazda's failed luxury brand, but those plans have been killed since Japan's economy stalled. This credit crunch affected all of Japan's car makers as they attempted to make inroads into the European market. But the Z-DOS 6 certainly looked like an executive cruiser with leather interior and a purposeful shape. The following year it was joined with the larger Z-DOS 9. Like the Z-DOS 6, it had the gadgets and style, but Mazda had a confused marketing message, a fatal error when trying to introduce a new sub-brand. So despite generally positive press, especially for its innovative Miller cycle engine, Z-DOS sales were sluggish. Lexus followed the LS up with the slightly smaller GS. Whilst not developed with the same mind-blowing budget, Toyota was slowly creating a range of excellent cars to sell worldwide. 1994 saw a flurry of action. The Granada ended production to be replaced by what Ford thought was an improvement, the bug-eyed Scorpio. Vauxhall Opel were clearly finding large car sales tough as they consolidated the Senator and Carlton down to one new name and model, the Omega. Both Ford and GM were rationalising their European car names. The Granada had been known as the Scorpio on the continent and the Carlton was known as the Omega. The Vauxhall Omega might be a new name, but other than safety improvements, this wasn't much more than a small update from the previous model. The new Jaguar XJ was the first sign of Ford's investment in the historic British carmaker, and it showed. £200 million have been spent turning an outdated, almost hand-built production line into one with robots that delivered a vehicle with tighter tolerances. In short, something that could justify the XJ's price. The new model showed Jaguar was on the right track. The new smaller executive saloon couldn't come too soon. GM's investment in Saab was bearing fruit as well with the new 900, although behind the scenes it wasn't a happy marriage. The 900 should have been a reskin of the Vauxhall Opel Vectra. Saab didn't feel this would be a car with the necessary luxury, so they made far too many costly changes as far as GM was concerned. Fiat's strategy was to use the Lancia name for its luxury cars, so while the Fiat Croma wouldn't be replaced when it ended production in a couple of years, the Lancia Thema was replaced by the stylish Kappa. It was better assembled than the previous car, but then the competition had moved on as well. Despite Japan's financial problems, it was update time for the Nissan Maxima and the Lexus LS. The Maxima would now be known as the Maxima QX. Nissan were tight-lipped on what QX might stand for. Quite exceptional? Well, given Nissan's use of the QX brand under Infiniti starting in 1996, it's likely it meant something like Quality Executive, and that was seen in the boost in specification. The Lexus LS continued to be superb, but although it was catching on stateside, European sales were slower. In 1994, European eyes were all on Germany. Mercedes updated their mid-size saloon, now called the E-Class. The previous model, that had been given a facelift just a year earlier, would continue in production in various guises until 1997. This was a decade of car companies renaming their range. The Audi 100 became the A6 and the V8 was updated to become the new A8. This car debuted the aluminium space frame chassis that allowed Audi to produce a lighter, faster car. They felt it could finally effectively compete with the BMW 7 Series and the Mercedes S-Class. Talking of the 7 Series, BMW released the third generation that same year. Along with the sleek new look, there were other firsts like curtain airbags and the first European car to offer satellite navigation. With such activity from German and Japanese executive cars, it was all quiet on the Western Front from other car companies in 1995, except for a facelift on the Peugeot 605. Honda launched a third generation of the Legend, while the Rover 800 was still stuck on the first generation. There was an update to the Mazda 929. It wasn't selling well in Europe though, and Mazda would end sales in 1997. BMW's 5 Series was quite the opposite, a continued big hit. The fourth generation hit showrooms with a similar look to the previous year's 7 Series. German car makers seem to have found the sweet spot in terms of luxury, function and design. The Volvo 850 wasn't doing too bad either. Like Audi and Mercedes, Volvo were rebranding its models, so in 1996 the 850 became the S70, along with a mid-cycle refresh that rounded off the corners. This was all part of lead stylist Peter Horbury's plan to move away from Volvo's boxy image. Fiat felt there was still space in the market for two luxury Italian saloons. The Lancia Kappa was more laid back, despite people associating Lancia with mad hot hatches after the Delta. Alfa Romeo was supposed to be the brand with the BMW-like sports luxury, and we were treated to not one, but two new models this year. The 155 was updated as the 156, and the 164 was replaced with the 166. But whilst car aficionados loved the Alfa brand, most customers stayed away, and the good-looking 166 wasn't a big seller. Fiat had moved on from the platform they shared with Saab, and so did Saab in 1997 with the replacement for the 9000, the Saab 95. It now used the same underpinnings as the Vauxhall Opel Chevrolet Vectra. It had leather and wood like any executive car should, but like the previous car, it had front-wheel drive and maxed out with a 3-litre V6, meaning it lacked the drama of, say, a rear-wheel drive BMW 5 Series V8. But then the new Audi A6 was also front-wheel drive, and that sold very well, although admittedly there was a V8 RS6. What made people prefer the Audi? Was it the brand name, brand loyalty, the looks, or was it something else? Meanwhile, Lexus continued the introduction of new models. The Lexus IS launched, a smaller vehicle the size of the BMW 3 Series. Lexus now had 3 models aimed squarely at Audi, BMW and Mercedes top sellers. And there was also an update to the Lexus GS, so all of their models now were less than 3 years old. After being starved of investment in the 1980s, the Jaguar XJ got another update, its second in 3 years. The new model introduced a new V8 engine as well as a small styling update. But then, given the car didn't look that much different to the original 1960s XJ, couldn't all of the XJ's updates be described as small styling updates? The Jaguar S-Type was certainly different to the XJ, a retro-inspired executive cruiser. It was somewhat upstaged by Rover's retro-inspired executive cruiser, the 75, that launched at the same event. The new Beetle seemed to indicate customers liked new takes on old designs, but the public never warmed to the Rover or the Jaguar. The S-Type replaced the unloved Ford Scorpio, ending production after only 4 years. And with the introduction of the 75, Rover killed off the 800, their Honda collaboration from over 10 years ago. Saab completed their renaming by refreshing the 900 as the 93. The Volvo 900 series was replaced by the new, not at all boxy and well-received S80. An independent Volvo seemed to be doing better than the GM-financed Saab, but Volvo wasn't to remain independent for long as they were purchased by Ford the following year. Would this be a good thing or a bad thing for Volvo as they moved into the 2000s? The Peugeot 605 had sold moderately well, with over 250,000 sold over 10 years before it was replaced by the 607 in 1999. But France and Italy's car makers were losing ground to cars like the new C-Class, produced by Daimler Chrysler, the new car powerhouse that threatened the dominance of the biggest car companies. At the start of the decade, that would have included Nissan, but they'd overextended and by the end of the 90s were bailed out by Renault, so it's no surprise that Nissan ended European sales of the Maxima that same year. At the start of the 90s, it had been Germany and Japan that were going to take over or consolidate the executive car market. Japan's economic problems had clipped their wings somewhat, so that onslaught amounted to just Lexus that was doing well in North America, but was struggling to make inroads in Europe. Germany was, on the surface, dominant. Audi was selling more cars every year and starting to look at smaller cars to take a larger market share. But BMW was smarting from their Rover purchase and were about to dump the whole operation, taking a massive write-off. Mercedes were buoyant about their Chrysler deal, but that would also sour and take their focus away from what they did best, making solid luxury cars. This would allow Audi to make headway against both its arch rivals. By the end of the millennium, the European executive car market belonged to Audi, BMW and Mercedes. What would happen in the 2000s? Thanks for watching. If you missed the 80s video, it's on the right. If I've done the 2000s video, I'll put a link to that as well. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.